Hey freshmen, Mrs. Campbell here. I am actually recording this for the cross-country kiddos who were gone last Thursday, which would have been Thursday, November 5th. And I'm also recording it for Jace since he was still homesick. So I strongly encourage you to, actually, I'm going to require you to watch this and watch the videos and whatnot that I send your way because you need it for the exam. I did make a copy of this lesson for you so you have it in your study guide, but there's a lot of important information and I think you will do yourself a disservice if you don't watch this. So I'm going to try to summarize it as quickly as I can, but I have uploaded the Google Slides, or actually the PowerPoint, to Google Classroom so that you can do the split screen again, minimize the YouTube video, minimize the PowerPoint or the Google, it'll be a Google Slides, and then you can watch them together. I said this in the last video lecture from Monday, but sometimes when you transfer the PowerPoint presentation to the Google Slides, it makes things kind of wonky, and sometimes things spill off the margins and they don't look the way that they're supposed to. So I apologize if it does that. The information is all there. It may just look a little strange. So on Thursday, we spent some time talking about the countries of the Caucasus region. I still want to say Caucasus. Either way, the Caucasus regions, which are the three small countries of Georgia, Armenia, and Azerbaijan. The fact of the day that day was the Armenian genocide. And let me zip down here real quick. I'm looking at my PowerPoint. Okay, yeah. So you'll notice that before we do the fact of the day, sorry, you'll notice that the first slide that you see of any pictures is a picture of two young men with dark hair, and it says Boston Bombers. And so I didn't have a chance to get to this in the previous lesson on Tuesday. We were talking about the Chechnya region and the Caucasus Mountains, which causes Russia a lot of problems because they tend to be fairly, there are a lot of radical Islamic groups there. And if you recall, last Tuesday we talked about the bombing that took place in a school in the Chechnya area of Russia back in, I think it was 2004, where some radical Islamists strung up a building to blow high. And they were asking for a prisoner exchange from Vladimir Putin, his government. And anyway, we don't know for sure if they intentionally detonated the bombs, but a number of the bombs were detonated. Several hundred children were killed. And if you'll recall, we talked about the fact that I believe that is the first time that the Samaritan shoeboxes were sent, and they were sent to that community because they had experienced such a devastation. So, so before we jump into our lesson today, and the fact of the day and information about the countries of the Caucasus region, I first wanted to go back and to have another discussion about Chechnya, which is that area of Russia. So back in 2000 and, I can't remember what year it was, 2013 maybe, 2014, I can't remember now, but anyway, there were two young men who were, it was actually a family, the Tsarnaev family, were political refugees from the Chechnya area of Russia and had been allowed to come to the United States when these two boys were very young, and their family grew up in the New England area, and they were able to take advantage of all the blessings of America. They got grants and scholarships for colleges. They went to school here. They had to live on welfare for a period of time when they couldn't make ends meet. So our country took this family in and took care of them. And something happened with the oldest brother, Tamarin, and he became radicalized, which essentially means he was unhappy in his life and he tried Islam, and he found himself listening to some radical imams that were teaching anti-American nonsense. And so over the course of time, Tamarin ended up flying back to Russia, the Chechnya area, and continued to be radicalized. Supposedly that's where he learned how to make bombs, pressure cooker bombs. And then he came back to the United States and began to plot a terrorist attack, a domestic terror attack, I guess you could call it, against the people of Boston. And so his little brother also contributed or was part of it. His name is Dokar, I think is how you say it. So they don't really know why, but in Boston, the Boston Marathon is always run on what's called Patriots Day in Boston. And it's a holiday that just Bostonians or Massachusetts celebrate. It goes all the way back to the American Revolution, because a lot of the seeds of the American Revolution happened within the Boston area, the Boston Massacre, the Boston Tea Party, and all that, Lexington and Concord. Anyway, everybody takes a day off, and they have this big, very, very worldwide famous marathon. And at the end of the marathon, downtown Boston, they set up a bunch of seats for the fans, and right there at the finish line. And because marathons takes so many people run marathons at different paces, the crowd kind of comes and goes over the course of 2 hours during that finish time. But there's a large number of people there. And so these two brothers had put together pressure cooker bombers. I believe there were 4 of them in 4 individual backpacks, and they were set out in different places in crowded areas near the finish line. And they were detonated by cell phones. Only 2 of the 4 detonated, but they created a lot of horrific damage. People were killed. A number of people lost limbs. They say that the area of the finish line in the grandstands where the first bomb went off was just like a pond of blood. They had put a lot of shrapnel and nails and other things inside the pressure cooker, and so when it exploded, it wasn't just the impact of the explosion, it was all of this metal went flying everywhere. So people had lacerations all over. Like I said, many people lost limbs, especially people who were in the vicinity of the bombs. And so over the course of the next couple of days, the FBI, everybody tried to find out who had done this, and they used cameras from different stores along the finish line there, or along the way where the marathon was being running, and they pieced things together. They saw where that backpacks had been set down. They were pretty sure that backpacks had been used, and then they followed the camera images until they figured these 2 boys that were walking through the crowd. In one of the pictures they had a backpack on, and the other one they did not have a backpack on, because a lot of people had backpacks on. And so they released their image, they drew pictures, they released their image, and the Tsarnaev brothers had not left the area. They had stolen an SUV, which is never a good idea if you were a criminal trying to escape justice, because it just draws attention to you. And so they had driven the SUV. It was a Cadillac SUV or something. They had driven it across the river in Boston over into Cambridge, which is where Harvard University is. And they were trying to buy, I think they were trying to go into like a convenience store. But Boston was in lockdown because the police didn't know what they were dealing with. They didn't know if this was another 9/11. They didn't know if there were all kinds of suicide bombers out there. They didn't know. They told people to go into their homes and stay locked in. They told businesses to close. So it was like it was deserted. And so when the police saw them driving through Cambridge, and I think they had stopped, I said, to go into a convenience store or something, a policeman approached them and asked who they were and asked to see their identification. And at that point, the older brother, Tamron, and both of them took positions behind the vehicle and started shooting at the police. The police called for help, but the policeman was shot and killed. Tamron was shot and killed. He shot at the police officer long enough for his little brother, Dokar, to get into the car and drive away, but not before he ran over his brother's body. His brother probably was already dead, but and then he took off into a neighborhood. He drove into a neighborhood, took off on foot, and he was wounded. He had been shot several times, and he crawled into underneath the tarp of a boat that was parked in someone's backyard, and he was hiding there, and nobody knew where he went. And so the police sent in all kinds of armored vehicles into this neighborhood, but the guy who owned the home happened to hear something, went out back, noticed a trail of blood and I think even a handprint or something going into the boat. And so he notified authorities. Authorities came to the house and eventually talked him into coming out with his hands up or something along those lines. He had no gun on him. He was just a 17-year-old kid who got caught up in a really awful thing. So he ended up being charged with, terrorism and murder and all kinds of things. He was sentenced to be executed, I think in 2015. but the state Supreme Court of Massachusetts overturned this sentencing and instead sentenced him to life in jail. And that, I believe, is currently pending, waiting to be heard at the Supreme Court to have the sentence reversed. He's in prison for the rest of his life no matter what, but the government is trying to overturn that ruling and have him executed. So, but those two men and their family were products of the conflict that had been going on in Chechnya for a very long time. I think I mentioned this to the other class, but Russia tried to warn us about him. They were observing him while he was over in Russia. The story that I heard was that his name was given to the American government. The American government put that name on a watch list so that he couldn't come back into the country, but his name was spelled incorrectly on the list by a couple of letters. And so he was allowed back in. If you look at the slide, that first slide with their pictures, it has his name on top of that file, and you can understand how someone might misspell his name. So anyway, I wanted to draw that connection back to the Caucasus region of Chechnya in Russia and draw to your attention the problem that Russia is having with radical Islam as well. There's some other pictures there that you can see of them walking around, still pictures, images taken from cameras. There are two short videos that I want you to watch associated with this story. One of them shows the bombs detonating and explains how that happened. The other one is just a short summary or overview of who Tamarin is and what may have led him to do what he did. And I don't know that even years later that they've really uncovered or figured out why he did what he did. Okay, so the fact of the day today is the Armenian genocide of 1915 to 1917. And what I am going to do is on the Google Doc that I'm going to upload your daily assignment log, I'm going to ask you to do just like you did on Monday, to write out your 6 facts for the Armenian genocide. You'll want to know that for the test on Thursday. Jace, I'm probably going to have you take the test at a later date, but if you show up on Thursday and feel like you're ready to take it, you can. Or if you just want to take the map portion of the test, I'm just going to leave that up to you because I know you have a lot on your plate. So, but for all the rest of y'all, you're taking it on Thursday. So, so the Armenian genocide of 1915 to 1917. So let me kind of walk you through this. Armenia historically was a fairly large area that engulfed about half of the country of Turkey. If you'll flip down to the next slide, you'll see a map of Europe and Africa, and you'll see Turkey is colored in purple, and parts of the Arabian Peninsula are colored in purple, and those areas reflect the Ottoman Empire that existed at the time of World War I. It had shrunk significantly, but it still was a caliphate and occupied all of Turkey, what we call modern-day Turkey, part of Armenia, and down into the peninsula. And the Ottoman Turkish Empire was, they were Muslim, and they occupied an area that was traditionally Christian. In fact, Armenia was the first country to declare itself a Christian nation, or the government, a Christian government. And so when the war started, there was this perception that the Christian population, the Armenian population of the Ottoman Empire, may actually work against the government in their fight in World War I. So the Ottomans fought with the Germans. So they were not on our side, they were on the other side. And so there was a plan concocted in the belly of the Ottoman Empire amongst its leaders to try to eliminate the Armenian population of what is sometimes called Anatolia, which is just another name for Turkey. And the first president of Turkey, Kemal Ataturk, who became president when it became a republic in 1923, he was part of the decision-making at this time. While Turkish history does not reflect this, most historians believe that Kemal Ataturk was involved in some way. And so they plotted a genocide against the Armenian people. They were going to eliminate this ethnically Armenian, religiously Christian population from the Ottoman Empire. They claimed it was for the safety of the empire during the war, but it was nothing short of horrible murder. And the Armenian genocide is considered the first genocide of the 20th century. we're all familiar with the Holocaust, or generally familiar with the Holocaust. That is the one that we study typically when we're talking about that century. But the Armenian genocide is was considered the first large-scale genocide of the 20th century. There were others that we will talk about later, but it was a bad century, I guess you could say. So anyway, so the pictures are a little bit rough, but they're pictures from that time period, so 1915-ish, and they're black and white. Some of the images are very, very sad. I'm sorry that I'm sending them to you. One of the images that you'll see, which is the third black and white image down, is a picture. It's hard to read, but it's a picture of several men that have been beheaded. Their bodies are laying at the bottom of a stake, and their heads are put on a stake, and then there is a card or something in Arabic, it looks like, underneath it. And I don't know what that card says, but I do know that the Armenians were referred to as infidels sometimes by the Muslim majority population. So but I'm going to walk you through the story. You can look through the images. So once it was decided that they needed to be eliminated, the first thing that happened is that the authorities rounded up the leadership of the Armenian people that lived within the city of Constantinople. At the time, it was called Constantinople. Today, it's called Istanbul. So at the universities, what's the word I'm looking for? Universities, basically. Those people that were part of the Armenian leadership were arrested. There were about 250, primarily men. And they were arrested, they were interrogated, they were tortured, and ultimately they were killed. So I guess you could say the Ottomans tried to cut the head off of the snake, or the enemy, what they perceived to be the enemy. And once the leadership was killed, there went out an order to round up all men, able-bodied men that were Armenian from their homes, and send them to work camps on behalf of the Ottoman government during the war, or just for execution, that they were spies or whatever the accusations were. So the Ottoman government literally went house to house, door to door in largely Armenian communities, and made the men come with them, and they were from ages teenagers all the way up to old men. Most of them were executed. And some of them were sent to work camps, but most of them were executed. And once the men were out of the way, then they decided that they would march the women and children out into the Syrian desert south of Armenia, where they left them there to die of starvation and thirst and malnutrition and exposure to the elements. And so horrible. Over the course of about an 18-month period, probably between 850,000 people and 1.5 million Armenians were killed, which, if that is accurate, that's on track to way surpass, had it gone on and on and on and on, the numbers of the Holocaust. So in a much shorter period of time, almost 1.5 million people were killed. They were killed by drowning. There were several instances that a newspaper in New York City reported that witnesses were being told to take women and children, Armenian men and women, or women and children, and put them on boats and cast them into the Black Sea with the intention of it toppling and them drowning. So they think about 50,000 people were killed that way. They also did a lot of weird inoculations where they actually inoculated people with expose them essentially to diseases that would kill them, whether it be measles or smallpox or whatever. And so lots and lots of people died that way. There were some women, Armenian women, that were spared, young children that were spared, who were made available to their Muslim neighbors as servants, really effectively as slaves. As we talked about within Islam, it is appropriate in war for Muslim men to have sex slaves. So some of those young women who were childbearing age were used sexually and horribly. And so there was a remnant of the population that was spared because they were being used as slaves or whatnot. But just the number of men that were killed was just unbelievable. So this historically Christian large civilization that existed in Turkey is now just a tiny little slither, probably the size of Rhode Island. And as a result of the genocide, thousands, well, those that were left, many of them left the country and came to the United States, where they sought refuge. And so there are large Armenian populations centers in many New England cities like Providence, Rhode Island, probably in Boston, Massachusetts as well. I think I mentioned this to you guys earlier in the week, but probably the most famous American Armenian family are the Kardashians because of their pop culture exposure and their television show and all of that. And so the Kardashians are Armenian. For the older generation, like your parents, they might know Cher from Sonny and Cher. She's a singer and she had a television show. She's a lot older now, but you may know who she is as well. I have a picture of her in the slideshow. So anyway, the final thing on I'll look at the pictures here in just a second, but kind of the final thing about the Armenian genocide is that the country of Turkey, once it was established in 1923, decided they didn't want anybody to know that they had done this. Remember, they're trying to trade with the West. They're trying to come across as civilized people and get rid of that Fez and the Ottoman Turks and the Muslim appearance and dress. They were dressing Western, so they wanted to be connected to the West, not with their history. And so they do not talk about the genocide. They say that if you ask in secret quarters of the government, they will say it never happened. They refuse to admit that it ever happened. They will not take ownership of it. And they even passed a law that made it illegal in Turkey to mention the genocide. And if you will recall, when Erdogan, the current president of Turkey, came to the United States, remember we watched that video where a bunch of thugs went over across the street to the Turkish embassy and started beating up protesters, and Erdogan watched it. So if I remember correctly, I think those people that were over there were actually protesting Turkey's refusal to admit that the genocide had taken place. So they were people who probably had Armenian roots that were protesting the Turkish government. I think that was one of the things they were protesting. So that's still in effect today. The survivors' family members have petitioned the United States Congress to kind of force Turkey to admit this and to negotiate some sort of recognition of the genocide, but as of yet, they still have not. There are a number of pictures in this PowerPoint let me put my glasses back on, that you can look at, but it basically tells the story that I just told. There's lots of pictures, it's awful pictures of children that have died. There's one particular one that is so sad. I'm sorry I'm sending these pictures to you. There's a little baby who has died. I don't know if these people have been shot. I'm going to guess that they've been shot or poisoned. It looks like they have disease on them. Anyway, there's a little baby in the arms of probably her mom, and they have all been killed. It's a terrible picture. Children starving, hoping that people will feed them. It's just awful. But I wanted you to be able to see it with your own eyes and testify, if you ever have the opportunity, that it really did happen. There's a video associated with this as well. It's called the Armenian Genocide, and it is probably about 15 minutes long, and I want you to watch it. It is the story of a woman who survived the genocide. She was 8 years old when it started, and eventually she came to the United States, was married, and has a huge family now. Her great-granddaughter tells her story and tells the story of the genocide and the story, and they also have a video recording of her great-grandmother telling about what happened to her family. It's pretty heartbreaking. So I do want you to watch that. Okay. The definition that we're going to use for genocide is the systematic and planned extermination of an entire national, racial, political, religious, or ethnic group. You'll notice that in your book, it uses the expression ethnic cleansing instead of genocide when it refers to this situation. And so in the past, I've had kids cross out the word ethnic cleansing and replace it with the word genocide. You may or may not have a book that has that crossed out. If you happen to notice that, I just wanted to draw that to your attention. And then then the PowerPoint jumps into the notes and discussion about the countries of the Caucasus region. So it says Armenia, Azerbaijan, and Georgia, and there's a map there. And as you know, this area these three countries were part of the Soviet Union. The next map shows you the Caucasus Mountains. It's this whole area, even including in Turkey, is very, very mountainous. Those three countries are kind of tucked in between the Ararat Mountains and the Caucasus Mountains. And they're all three of them are pretty small countries, and they're also tucked between the Black Sea and the Caspian Sea. So they are just tucked right in the middle there. The notes, most of these are taken from your book, but I'm just gonna zip through them really quick. If you want to read over it yourself, it's on starts on page 394. But let's see here. The first thing that that particular section talks about is the mountains, and that's why it's called the Caucasus region. And Mount Elbrus is the tallest mountain in all of Europe, and it is located on the border between Georgia and Russia. So it sits on that mountain range. You can see the north side of the mountain from Russia. You can see the south side from Georgia. It's 18,510 feet, so it is very, very, very tall. The mountains, the Caucasus Mountains, are actually pretty rugged mountains. There's lots of snow skiing, snowboarding, trekking. They're not like the Ural Mountains that are kind of weathered and smaller. They're actually pretty jagged. They're taller than the peaks in the Swiss Alps even, so they're pretty amazing. All three of these countries were part of the Soviet Union. Armenia and Georgia, so the country that borders Russia and Armenia right below it, are predominantly Christian countries. The people would identify as Christian. Armenia, as I said before, was the first country to declare Christianity as its national religion. I don't know if you remember this, but when we were talking about Turkey and we watched some of the drive-through history videos, Dave Stott went to Cappadocia and he went into the fairy chimneys, and then he also went into the underground church and the underground city that sprawled out all underneath Cappadocia. So those were probably used by Armenian Christians, because that's the area that Armenia was during the persecution of the Roman Empire before they became Christian. And so I think, I've just been looking at the map there. And then Azerbaijan is associated with Iran. The people, I understand, are predominantly Persian. They have their own language, and they are very much influenced by Iran, including their religion. So Azerbaijan is predominantly Muslim. And it's the only country that we've talked about thus far associated with Russia. The Baltic states or the Caucasus countries, it is the only one of those countries that we've talked about thus far that's predominantly Muslim. Now the stand countries like Kazakhstan and Turkmenistan, which we're not going to really spend much time talking about other than identifying them on a map, they are almost all predominantly Muslim. They are sitting closer and closer to that part of the world. So. But of the ones we've talked about, Azerbaijan is the one that is primarily Muslim. There are lots of pictures to look at, lots of pictures of mountains and trekking and snowboarding. There's a heli skiing picture. There's a video associated with that. It's real popular to take a helicopter up to uncharted territories where people don't normally ski. You have to be experienced to do this, and they drop you off in the middle of nowhere. And then you usually have a guide that kind of guides you down the mountain. And then the helicopter will meet you at a lower point, and I guess you can keep doing it again if you want to. So there's a real short video associated with that as well, and I want you to watch it. Let's see here. There's a slide that has a bunch of pictures of various people from this region. There's a picture of Cher and Kim Kardashian. All of these people on this slide are from Armenia, so to give you an idea of kind of what they look like. And then there's several pictures of Armenia. There's Yerevan, Armenia, and you can actually see the peaks of Mount Ararat in the background. It's a pretty modern city, all things considered. They have this shopping district called the Pink City because of the stone that's used. You'll see that there. The Yerevan Plaza, I believe, is host to their government, the seat of their government. There's some more pictures of it. It's actually a pretty neat city. And you'll notice the clothing that the Armenian people wear is very distinct. Kind of looks like a little bit like Central American, very colorful. Pictures of the children, looks like they're reenacting something from the Crusades or something. Lake Savan, you'll see lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of old churches sprinkled in all of these pictures. There's a temple in the distance of Mount Ararat, more Christian churches. The rooftops of the homes tend to be this kind of the red clay. There's a woman and her daughter, very Armenian looking, more Christian churches. Grapes and making wine are a very, very big deal there. It's one of their big exports. another Christian church, and then there's a Christian church that's almost buried underground. Picture of Miss Armenia 2016. Again, she could be a Kardashian. So the Kardashians definitely, especially Kim, reflect what the people of Armenia look like. There is a picture of a monument in the capital of Armenia that is there to remind the people of the genocide. And so on the day that they remember, they have a memorial service, and people bring in flowers. There's a picture of flowers being laid at the memorial and people going to see it. And then there's also a picture of the Kardashians who happened to be there one year and paid respects while they were there. Let's see here. And then Azerbaijan, jumping over to Azerbaijan. So Azerbaijan is the capital. Baku is fairly modern. I would say Azerbaijan is not desperately poor or not incredibly wealthy like some of its Middle Eastern neighbors like Abu Dhabi and all of that. But the center square of the Capitol building has these 3 buildings you'll see in the picture there, and they look like penguins to me. There's another picture of them from a distance. So I guess that's their attempt to copycat Dubai and all of that. Several pictures of the city. There's some pictures of the people of Azerbaijan. They have a little bit of a mixture of Mediterranean look, along with, you see some blonder hair, probably the European influence. And then, of course, lots of beautiful mosques in Azerbaijan. And then they also capitalize on the Caspian Sea oil. So there's lots of pictures of oil rigs. And then there's Miss Azerbaijan. She looks very Middle Eastern to me. And then Mr. Style 2015. I don't know why I put that picture in there, but get an idea of what they look like. Actually, you know, they kind of look like the boys from Chechnya, so that whole area kind of looks that way. And then Georgia, which is the country that borders north of Armenia, borders Russia, very ancient area, been occupied by various empires over the centuries. And the capital city, Tbilisi, I'm not sure how to pronounce it. There's an old wall from I'm not sure if that dates back to the Ottomans or what, but it's highlighted or lights shine on it at night. So it's a modern city as well as enjoying some of its antiquities. Lots of red roofs again. And then I've included pictures of the people of Georgia so that you can kind of, again, see what they look like. They also tend to have dark hair, dark eyes, but there's a picture of a girl with blue eyes. Anytime you see someone with this hair color, and they have blue eyes, that usually means they've got European in them somewhere. Although a lot of Russians also have blonde eyes, blue eyes. Okay, I think that's the end of the PowerPoint. So I will upload this video, send it to you, and include all of the video links that I want you to watch. If you would fill out the daily assignment log so that I know that you watched this and check it off, I will get you some points in RenWeb there. So I think that's it. If you have any questions, let me know. Bye.